Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, the podcast that is dedicated to cold cases, missing persons, systemic injustices, and the art of forensic science that seeks answers when silence remains. My name is Asha Carmody, and I am a forensic scientist and a criminologist, and in each episode we examine the evidence, the systems, and the human stories that are often left behind. Hello guys, and welcome to another episode of Exhuming the Truth. There's been a lot going on lately, and I have noticed people to be a lot more passionate, I guess I want to use that word, in the comments, particularly on YouTube. So if you don't know our podcast, I know the majority of our listeners use Spotify or Apple, and we can see that with our analytics, but our podcast does broadcast on YouTube as a podcast. There's just like our image that you see when you're listening to a podcast and the audio, and nothing special, basically the same as everywhere else, but it does get a lot of the wild comments occur on YouTube, and I have to say I have had some funny comments in the last year and a half of doing this, sometimes not so nice, and I will admit I have lost a lot of sleep over it in the past because I was kind of getting used to it. I feel like now my skin is a lot thicker and I'm seeing the humor in what people have to say, and I'm going to tell you two of my favorite comments that people have made. One on YouTube, it's funny because they're like opposing each other, but one on YouTube and one on Facebook. I got a message on Facebook and it was so contradicting, I guess, and the lady was like, I love your work, but you sound like a man. Like, she said that I talk like a man and that I can fix it and I'm deliberately doing it, and women don't sound like this. But I'm very sorry, Sandra, but I do sound like this, and I'm also a singer, and my singing voice is also quite low and husky, so I apologize, I guess, but I just want people to know that there's literally thousands of other podcasts that you can listen to where you might like someone's voice, and also the transcript is there if you want to read it and not listen to me. Otherwise, you also don't have to say anything. I think that's a really good lesson, I guess, to take away. But the other person on YouTube said that it's my Australian accent that they don't like, and it's too high-pitched. So I don't know what is going on with the internet this last week, but I have had a really good laugh. So it's nice to be in that frame of mind, actually, because I have noticed my favorite thing that I have learned since doing this is that there's actually so much more good people than there are nasty ones out there. And I have such a good following and such a good community, and I'm really appreciative of you guys. So I know a few of you will enjoy that. But I'll get into the regular kind of welcome and housekeeping for you, because there will be somebody who did not appreciate that introduction. But, can't please everyone. So before we get into today's episode, I want to give you all a few updates, and I have a massive, enormous, giant thank you to all of you guys in the community. First of all, I just have to say thank you for your generosity through our crowdfunding efforts. We have now booked our flights to Queensland from Perth from the 23rd of July to the 26th of July to continue our work on the disappearance of Jack McLennan. Now, this trip is simply not possible without the support of our listeners and followers and supporters. And that also includes people who didn't have or don't have the monetary means to contribute, people who've been talking about it and sharing it. Every donation, every share, every message of encouragement, it's all helped make it happen, and I can't thank you enough. We are leaving that open because we do also need to hire a car and find somewhere to stay. But like I've said across our social platforms, we are not profiting off this at all, and we will do a breakdown of where the funds are going once they're spent. Now, while in Queensland, we're going to be, gathering information, speaking with people, and more importantly, searching. It's boots on the ground doing the work. We have areas of interest that we will be searching, and we will, of course, coordinate one or two volunteer-based searches, and we'll keep you updated throughout that journey. Now, recently, I also attended the coronial inquest into the murder of Bridget Biddy Porter. I did that online, and there was so many other people online, which was fantastic to see that support for Dom and his family, and it was an incredibly emotional experience. And like many people following the matter, I left with so many concerns and questions regarding various aspects of this case and the process surrounding it. If you're not already following the Justice for Biddy page on Facebook, please do. I know that inquest will continue/conclude in November of this year. Now, looking ahead, I'm going to be travelling to South Australia for Crime Scene Oz in Victor Harbour. And if you're in the area, I would absolutely love you to come along, and I would love to meet you. And I'm going to be running a mock crime scene experience and talking all things forensics, which is really cool and fun. And tickets are available right now. I have posted them on my page. I'll do so again. You can find them on the Crime Scene Oz Facebook page as well. I've also had quite a lot of people asking about merchandise, and we're just gauging interest right now in hoodies and t-shirts. So if that's something you'd be interested in, just let us know however you like. If we've got enough people interested, we'll go ahead and do that. And finally, if you haven't already, please head over and follow our charity Facebook page so we can continue the work and keep on advocating for missing persons and cold cases and victims of crime and victim survivors, a whole range of people. So anyway, today we are doing Where is Gus Lamont Part 2. We have had some very passionate people across our social media for this. Over the past couple of days, we've had a lot going on, I guess, and a lot of people have obviously seen the 7 Spotlight special featuring Josie Murray and the disappearance of 4-year-old Gus Lamont, which of course happened in September last year, 2025, and this has generated enormous public interest. It kind of is looking like another William Tyrrell situation, unfortunately, and it's just not good enough. And people are confused, and there's multiple family members, multiple properties, and a number of people connected to our Oak Park station and the nearby community of Yunta. Now, if I remember correctly from this, Josie Murray is the biological father of Gus's mum. Who transitioned into being a female into Josie in the 90s. And Josie said that Oak Park Station, where they live, is approximately a 40-minute drive from Yunta. Now, in today's episode, we're going to break down the key individuals connected to Gus and his disappearance, and we're going to look at the family dynamics and all of the public reports. I've kind of shoved them together and worked out what's what. We'll chat about the Spotlight interview and explore what's known, what's disputed, what questions remain, I guess. And as always, we're not here to speculate. We're here to just ask, really important questions and get people's brains ticking and hopefully contribute to a resolution. At the forefront of this episode is Gus and his welfare. And I know online there's been a whole lot of people going on and on and on about sexual orientation of Josie Murray, and I could not care less because all my questions relate to Gus. Of course, there's, many questions you could have there, but that's kind of out of my wheelhouse. So let's get into it. This is the story of Gus Lamont. Where is Gus Lamont? Part 2. Now, I will reference where I got all of this publicly available information, and I am first and foremost going to refer to the 7 Spotlight interview with Josie Murray, and I'm going to go through, I guess, my take from it. If you have a different take, cool. I'm happy to chat about that. I would just prefer it to be a respectful conversation. Different insights or opinions are very, very helpful and important, and that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, when I was watching this, the biggest revelation was Josie's statement that police have identified her as the main suspect and that she completely rejects this theory. Now, when she was talking about it, she described the suggestion that Gus died accidentally and was concealed on the property as just impossible, basically. And from an investigative standpoint, this tells us a couple things. So police have obviously appeared to have narrowed their focus significantly, and they have kind of named Josie as the, I would say, main suspect, but kind of the only suspect. They haven't really spoken about anyone else. This also kind of shows us that Josie wants the public to know that she is disputing the evidence and the conclusions that are kind of being thrown around there. And the family and investigators remain far apart in their interpretation of events. This is really important. Now, she did publicly, I guess there was always the discussion around an abduction theory, but she did publicly introduce this in her chat and basically said she believes that Gus could have been abducted and pointed to things that she considered suspicious, and that included tire tracks and items that appeared to have been moved around the property. She also suggested potential evidence may not have been properly followed up, and the question investigators would ask in regards to this, if we were rebutting what she is saying, we would say, you know, were these observations noticed immediately or did it come over time? Were they documented? And can they be independently verified? So not by just Josie, but others. And suspicious observations can be really important, but investigators generally need evidence linking them to their disappearance. The interview actually provided one of the most detailed public timelines so far because we really haven't heard much from any of the family, let's be entirely honest. Now, according to Josie, she said that Gus was noticed missing around 5:30 p.m. She also said that family members conducted their own search. So obviously they've realised he wasn't around and they've gone out and had a look. And then she said that the police were notified at around 8 p.m. Now, for investigators, the most important part of any missing child case is who was there, who was last with the child, who last saw the child, when was the last time each of these people saw the child, and how much time has elapsed before the authorities were called. And that timeline will have been scrutinised extensively by police, I hope. But there appears to be a clash between the police conclusions and public assumptions because all we've really heard from in this case is essay poll. Let's be entirely honest. I have not seen the parents speak or show their faces or attend kind of anything. Odd to me. We'll talk about that shortly. But South Australia Police have publicly stated that they don't believe Gus simply wandered away. And this, again, that's funny to me because they were adamant at the start and then they changed their mind, and I'd like to take a deeper look at that turning point for them. But they have indicated that there's a person known to him and that's their suspect, and no charges have been laid. But the Spotlight interview highlights that police believe that there's reasons to focus on someone known to Gus. So obviously they're not going to disclose everything that they know, otherwise that would just be detrimental. Josie then believes that police may be overlooking alternative explanations and kind of focusing on her with maybe a bit of a confirmation bias. And then the public still lacks access to most, if not any, evidence police are relying on. Like, we have no idea why why they would be focusing all their attention on Josie if that's what they're doing. We've got no context for that. So people are understandably like, what the hell is going on? Now, what stood out to me personally as an investigator, I think as one of the most, if not the most significant aspect of the interview, was not any single claim made by Josie. It was actually the contrast between police saying that there's no evidence of an abduction and that a known person remains their suspect. And then there was also Josie arguing that indicators of an abduction existed and were not adequately pursued. This contradiction is where the central mystery lies for me. And I have to be cautious here and make a point to say that it's important to separate what Josie believes happened, what police believed happened, and what can actually be proven. Very, very important, because the public has only seen fragments of the evidence. That includes me. And investigators have access to, obviously, things like phone records, forensic examinations, witness interviews, search results, vehicle movements, timelines, and all this other information that obviously has not been released and will not be released, I guess, until anything is solved. Now, given my work in missing persons, the most useful exercise is probably not asking whether Josie is believable or not, but asking what facts from the interview can be independently tested. And that's the most reliable method that we would use. So, for example, she mentioned a dog barking. She also mentioned vehicle tracks. I've taken notes as I'm watching this. I'm that annoying person watching something, pausing every 5 seconds and writing it down. So dog barking, she said there was vehicle tracks, the timing of movements around the property, who was present during the critical time window, and whether any phone, GPS, CCTV, or vehicle data supports or contradicts any of these accounts. So these are the areas where real investigative value is usually found. One of the most common pieces of feedback that I receive is that listeners want more forensic analysis and less waffling, I guess. And that's what we're doing today. And that's great feedback. And I love that so much because that's what I really love to do. However, sometimes I feel like I'm being too heavy on a topic that I know a lot about and might be overwhelming for you guys. So if that's the case after you've listened to this, or it's the opposite, please let me know. Now, again, we're not choosing sides here. We're trying to draw out, this is how we operate, basically. I'm giving you the inside scoop. We are drawing out the facts and trying to verify them, the ABCs, like I always say. Assume nothing, believe nothing, check everything. What can be checked out of what Josie has said? And from there, we can have a look at her integrity and the truth behind her interview and the truth behind what's happened to Gus. Now, obviously, as a criminologist and a forensic scientist, I believe that the most important question is not what we think happened. The most important question is what can actually be proven. So put your forensics and crim hat on for tonight. Let's do it this way, because every investigation begins with a timeline. Now, before considering motives and suspects and theories or investigators, what they're doing, I guess we're doing this my way today. But we would first establish who was there, when they were there, and how those movements can be independently verified. So this is step one. And a timeline is not built from assumptions. And we have to be so careful with that because people can say things, but unless it can be proven, we cannot take this down as verified. And it's all built from evidence. And that evidence can include, like I said before, anything that is data related, like GPS, CCTV, and that sort of thing, but also witness statements. So people who are not directly related, I suppose, to the family, but have witnessed something, or I saw this person at this time leaving or entering their property, things like that, vehicle movements, any photos and any findings. And the reason timelines are so important is simple. People lie, memories fade, and digital evidence often doesn't. And this is why investigators place a really, really enormous importance on corroborating the witness accounts with the objective evidence. Now, everything I'm discussing is based on publicly available information, which, again, I'll reference for you. You can take a look yourself. There's not a whole lot available, I have to be entirely honest, but let's have a look at the critical questions here, because who was the last verified person to see him, and what was last observed at that time? Can the sighting be independently verified? What opportunities exist for him to leave the area voluntarily? And I have to say, as a little personal break, as a mother with 2 sons, one of which is quite young, I also have horses who are in a 10-acre paddock, and obviously that's not the same size as this station. However, in Josie's interview, she did say that Gus would roam around the property quite often. He was a country kid. He would stick to the roads on the property, and he would often wander 5 to 10 acres at a time. And a lot of people online have been like, there's no way a little kid would be doing that. Yes, there is. I have to say that. Like, if I take my kids in to my horse's paddock, they might be walking around the 10 acres for a considerable amount of time. They love it. Obviously, it's different because it's an enclosed paddock and I know where they are because they can't enter or exit without going past me near the gate. And yeah, that's very different. But just for the sake of kids wandering and playing and exploring land, yes, a child could and would do that. Now, one forensic principle often misunderstood by the public is that the absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. However, investigators also look at expected evidence. For example, if a child wandered away like Gus, what would you expect to find? Now, if a child was abducted, then what would you expect to find? Or if a child had died accidentally and, there was no concealment, what evidence would you expect to find? All of these different scenarios, you have to compare the evidence that they have against the evidence that they would expect to see in all of these different scenarios. And this is something in missing persons that I work with a lot. And when people go missing intentionally versus accidentally versus foul play related, the evidence that you expect is very different, and the evidence that you're looking for is also very different. So this is actually referred to in my line of work as hypothesis testing, and the strongest theory is usually the one most consistent with the available evidence. Now, with that, I'm going to go into the claims that Josie's made, and we're going to kind of unravel this together, because in her interview, Josie Murray raised concerns regarding the possibility of an abduction, and she also questioned that aspect of the investigation. Now, those statements are so important because they represent an alternative hypothesis. However, if we're looking at this with our forensic glasses on for a moment, the key question is not whether a theory is possible. The question is it supported by evidence? And from that, we'd ask, can the observations described be independently verified? Like I said earlier, were they documented at the time? Do they align with physical evidence? Can they be corroborated by other witnesses? This distinction is so critical, and the evidence carries greater weight than the belief, obviously, because this is something we can carry and prosecute with. Now, my good friend at Sleepers podcast, Brian Littley, he made a really great video today in regards to Gus Lamont. If you haven't listened to it, please do. And he made a lot of really great points, but the one thing that really stood out to me is early on when Gus went missing, a lot of community volunteers were at the station, because it's enormous, helping to find little Gus, and this is incredible. I love that. Police kind of get annoyed sometimes, but I think it's great. Won't go into too much detail over that, but basically Brian was saying, if you were there and you have not made yourself known to police, please do, because they need to know who was there, what day, what time, when, exactly what where you were searching, what you saw, what you heard, who you saw, all of these things. It can be so critical to something like this, an investigation of this scale. Anything so small can help solve the case. And I think, I've said that a billion times over. But like Brian said, if you were there and you haven't yet made yourself known to SA Pol, please do. And just give them an account of, the dates, the times, what you were doing and all that sort of thing, who you went there with, what car you were in. Just as much detail as possible for them. Nothing is too much detail. So please go over and watch that if you are on Facebook. But getting into the search itself. Now, this was an extensive search effort, and I had the feeling early on when they were like, okay, there's a child and he's wandered off on this station. I just thought, no. When I looked at it, I had a bad feeling, because the station is very remote. It's very dusty. It's very Aussie remote. So it's dusty. It's the property where you would see anybody coming and going, because the dust would be flying up in the air, and you'd see it from a mile off, because it's not, all these tall trees. It's quite short shrubs and quite vast. That's probably the word I'm looking for. And I did not feel good about it at all. And it made me just straight away, it made my mind go to intentional. I'm unsure, at this point, where I stand with that. I still feel the same way, but I'm much on the fence like everybody else. I have Gus's welfare at the forefront of my mind, but I do feel that there are so many pieces of evidence that we should have, should it be anything else. And when large-scale searches like this, they fail to locate not just the missing person, but any evidence that they would expect to find. That's really not a good sign. And this is where a lot of people are thinking, not was he ever in the search area at all, but when did he actually go missing? Did he really go missing at that time? Now, there were independent witnesses who have said that they saw little Gus in town. I believe it was the day before, don't quote me. And that's great if true. Because I seriously was thinking for a moment there, maybe he's been missing for longer and, something kind of sinister had happened to him. But who knows? I hope that is a true account and he was seen the day before. But when we talk about things like the digital forensics in this case, obviously it's 2026, we've got modern investigations happening and a lot of that is driven by digital evidence, right? But we're super remote here. So things like, we rely heavily in suburban areas, of course, mobile phones, location data, messaging applications. They can be very, very specific. And this case, probably not so specific because it's very remote, but also at the same time, a lot of the digital evidence, if not all of it, it hasn't been publicly released. And obviously they have undoubtedly examined every available source to be able to reconstruct movements and interactions surrounding the disappearance, but how much they have is also unknown because there's not a whole lot to rely on here. This is a station. It's not just a farm, it's a station. It's huge. It's a working station. And these people weren't kind of, just sitting there on their laptops working from home. So let's talk about what we actually do know. So that we're all on the same playing field here. No, actually, let's not do that. Let's just do a bit of a forensic breakdown on abduction versus wandering versus concealment. And I personally would just put a big fat X through wandering. However, let's just get into it. Now, one of the biggest challenges, obviously, is determining which scenario fits best in regards to the evidence that is available. And it's not about determining guilt right now. And even if it was, we can't do anything about that. That is the police's job, but everybody is entitled to their opinion. So I've put together a couple of scenarios that we can go over, and I'm interested, to know your thoughts. So first is obviously the one that we were fed day one, and that's that Gus wandered away. And when a young child wanders from a location, investigators are obviously aware that missing children behave differently to missing adults, and kids don't always travel in straight lines. They get distracted. They might seek shelter. They might see a nice looking stick. They might be kicking rocks. They might be scared. You never know. But when obviously we look at terrain, and this is a very vast area, but there are bodies of water and they were searched. So, the hazards, the whole location is a hazard because it's hot, it's vast. There's bodies of water like the dams. And as we learnt in the Spotlight interview, there was actually a bit of a bunker set up, which seemed to be a bit dangerous. Now, how far could a child of Gus's age realistically travel? How long would that take? Especially with the weather. It's hot. They kind of gave a description. I believe it was a long sleeve dark or royal blue shirt with a minion on the front, and I can't remember if he was wearing shorts or not, or pants, but he had gumboots on, I believe. So what would happen here in terms of the investigation, this is very early on, we would be doing behavioural profiling, and that's where missing children are most likely to be located based on their age, their mobility, and the environmental conditions, not just on this case, but previous cases, and then they would compare that to all of the elements that make up Gus Lamont's situation. Now, if a child like Gus has wandered away, you would generally expect there to be a possibility of locating physical evidence. That's as simple as that. And that's why, when it was day one and they were searching, they didn't find him, I thought, nah, he didn't wander off, because we would expect to see evidence, and that would include footprints, not just one, numerous, disturbed vegetation, clothing, taking a hat off, things like this, or eventually the child himself. But, even though it was difficult terrain, or is difficult terrain, we had Aboriginal trackers, and that just solidified that for me. When we had the Aboriginal tracker go in and they couldn't find anything, no way did he wander off. Now, Scenario 2 would be abduction by an unknown person, and this is often the first theory raised publicly when there's a missing child, but statistically, it's actually among the least common scenarios for a missing child. And for an opportunistic stranger abduction to occur, you would generally need to establish both opportunity and access. So you'd be looking at, was there evidence of an unknown vehicle, witnesses, suspicious activity reported nearby, any CCTV, any things like that. Alternative tyre tracks, which Josie did say there were. Any alternative footprints, although I believe, when they were searching for Gus, they were looking for his footprints, so they probably would have noticed unknown footprints. I'm unsure. So that's also, it's not impossible. It is a possibility. Investigators would therefore look for objective evidence supporting this abduction hypothesis rather than relying on suspicion, of course. It's not about a feeling, it's about evidence. Then you have scenario 3, death followed by concealment. So another possibility that we would be looking at is whether Gus has passed away accidentally or intentionally and then was subsequently concealed. So this scenario presents very unique forensic challenges, and in many cases you would begin looking for inconsistencies between witness accounts and physical evidence. And this is what raises the red flag with me. If police are saying, oh, hey, we have a main suspect or known suspect, and it's one of the grandparents, I believe they said, but Josie's claiming it to be her, from her own account, that makes me think that they have picked up inconsistencies in statements and timelines. And that is evidence usually consistent with death and concealment. So, timelines not aligning, statements changing over time, statements different to the next person's statement when you both should have had the same account. All of these things like unexplained gaps in activity. So this is where I'm at the moment, just professionally. So if there was concealment, you might see investigators doing things like ground searches like they have. They would bring in cadaver dogs, archaeology even, maybe soil analysis, geospatial mapping. There's a lot of things they can do, but they tend not to do that unless they have pretty strong indicators that they should be doing that, if that makes sense. They're not just going to go out and do it for the sake of doing it. And importantly, the absence of a body doesn't prevent investigators from developing a really strong hypothesis. That's really important because a lot of homicide prosecutions around the world have proceeded without a body being recovered, and those are no-body homicides, which I've spoken about before, which I did specialise in for 12 months. So the investigators require a body of evidence rather than necessarily the physical body itself. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the timeline is the backbone of this entire investigation. And that starts even with who saw Gus last, where was everybody at the time, what time was it when you saw him, and where were everyone else? Why were they there? How long were they there for? How reliable are these accounts? Are there any inconsistencies? Can we challenge anything that you're giving us? Now, I spoke earlier about confirmation bias, and I just want to touch on that really quickly because a lot of people can very quickly become attached to theories, and this is where differing opinions really matter, and that's something I learned very quickly professionally. It is actually a high sign of intelligence to have somebody actually change your mind on such a topic because you're absorbing new information and you're considering all sides to a situation or a theory, because the danger with confirmation bias is once you've become emotionally invested in a theory, you start to look for evidence that supports that theory, and then that makes you in turn ignore evidence that actually contradicts it or exists otherwise. You're kind of sweeping that under the rug, and the good investigations do the absolute opposite of that. You've got to stay open-minded and you've got to try to disprove your own theory to see how strong your theory is. And if a theory survives that scrutiny, then the confidence in that theory grows, if that makes sense. So it's very much science talk, but it is very true to investigations. And if you can't change or can't prove your theory otherwise, you you've got that security, and that's the scientific method. That's forensic reasoning. And ultimately, that's how answers are found. And the goal is not to prove a theory. The goal is to discover the truth. So it's very important. And I know when you get emotionally invested, it can be difficult. It was something that took me quite a bit of time to learn how to do. I feel like I've gotten it down pat now. Some cases I go, no, I have a feeling. I just have a feeling. But even when I do have a feeling, I do have to look at all of the available evidence. Is very, very important, because what we know and what we think we know are two very different things. What we actually do know here is that Gus disappeared. So we know extensive searches have been conducted. We know investigators have spent years, well, not years, that's a lie, months examining this case. I don't know why I said years. That was very over the top. Months. He went missing in September last year. We know that there's various family members. We don't know the dynamics. I can't understand. Sorry, you might have heard my little dog Chili shaking her ears then. We don't know the family dynamics. And I find the family dynamics even more strange the more kind of information we're drip fed from the media. I just find it so odd. And everybody I feel is so not into this case, but everyone's invested in it for Gus's welfare. And everybody's kind of wondering what the hell's going on with this family and why is no one speaking? Because I know for sure that if that was my child, you'd be sick of my face and my voice by now, because I'd be over everything, on everything, and pleading for help. So I just find that one of the most strange things of all time. And I did let you guys pop some questions in, and I was going to try and answer them. I've done my best. I'll do that at the very end. But I don't know any more than you guys do. Like, yes, I do in a forensic and crim kind of way, and how we would go about it, and in a different way to look at it, but I don't know more than you do. So if you're listening to this, I'm assuming that you've listened to part 1 of Where is Gus Lamont. That has obviously all the details of the case that are kind of known. And I'm also going to assume that you watched the 7 News Spotlight interview with Josie Murray, so that we're on the same page, because we've got a couple of questions. And, my questions are the same as yours, guys. When did they start digging out the cellar or bomb shelter? So this is kind of like it kind of just looks like a square hole in the ground that they've got going on there. It's very bizarre. It's a bit of a mess. Found it odd, as somebody else commented yesterday, that Josie said, I had a look in there for Gus, but there was no blood in there. So they were obviously assuming, maybe he went missing and he's hurt himself. I don't know. But this person has asked, when did they start digging out the cellar or bomb shelter? And what we do know is that an excavation works were occurring on the property around that time. What remains unclear is the dates and exactly, when that work started, and whether investigators have established a precise timeline for that excavation. I would imagine that they would, surely. And the reason that this matters is that it obviously helps establish what areas were accessible, who was working where, and whether any assumptions about a timeline are accurate. But also, if they had strangers or other people on the property, that's also very important information. So that makes me wonder too, did they have people on the property there that they had working and something's happened there? Who knows? Could Gus have disappeared before the day he was reported missing? And like I said, I had this feeling, and there's currently no public evidence to support that theory. However, there was the investigators releasing that information saying that they have accepted the timeline that he disappeared on the day when he was reported missing, and this could be due to the witness account saying they saw him the day before. Now, if they've accepted that timeline, could they have done that just for the sake of accepting it? I mean, yes, but could they have done that because they have corroborated information that secures that timeline? Also, yes. I know I would love to give you more questions, like I have some kind of insight that everyone else doesn't, but I don't. I'm just doing my best to kind of give you guys guidance and open your minds a little bit. Were Gus's parents separated, and was there a custody dispute? I tried to look into this and I didn't see any evidence that a custody dispute played a role in this case at all, but unless there's evidence suggesting it otherwise, which I couldn't find, I can't really appropriately draw conclusions about the family circumstances. However, again, like I said, I find it very weird that mum and dad haven't shown their faces and made a public plea or just like literally even been anywhere ever. Like, what the hell? Someone else said, where was Gus's sibling? This is one of the many details that, again, hasn't really been discussed publicly. Now, investigators would obviously certainly have the answer to this, and maybe they're not giving it for a specific reason. Maybe it hinders their investigation somehow. I have no idea. As it stands, Josie said from Josie's account that Shannon, who is Gus's mum's biological mother, Shannon was at the home with Gus. Now, this is all I can tell you. I don't know whether Shannon had the other child as well. I don't know. Yeah, I've tried very hard, trust me, to find anything else to give you guys. Again, this is referring to the Spotlight interview. Why is the footprint in the dam considered significant? Now, the significance on this would depend on what the investigators learned from it, if they learned anything at all. And if the shoe responsible for the print was identified and Gus was not wearing those shoes when he disappeared, then the footprint obviously would be less important than initially believed. But investigators often document every potential clue for determining its relevance. It's obviously more important to have more than less, and it might tie in somewhere, somehow later. One footprint, weird. Could Gus have entered a vehicle while playing and become trapped? So it's a possibility that people have raised, because kids are obviously naturally curious. He's, out in the remote area. This might be entertaining for him. Josie did say he had a fascination at one point with opening or closing the car door. Whether that scenario was investigated or ruled out hasn't been publicly detailed either, and it can, sit on one of the theories that falls under an accident. Was everyone with access to the property thoroughly investigated, including friends and regular visitors? Now, that's a very reasonable question, particularly in a missing child investigation. Like we just said, if they were doing land works and there were people working on that, that would surely be documented. Police generally seek to ID and account for people who have come and gone, but the public are not going to know that full extent, and they're not going to give it to us, basically. Why did it take time for a photograph of Gus to be released publicly? And this is one of the more interesting questions that I noted down. And in modern day missing child investigations, photos are released really quickly, even with adults, and that maximizes awareness. Obviously, people know what they're looking for. It's a bit hard to know what you're looking for when you don't know what they look like. So whether there was a specific reason for any delay in this, hasn't been publicly explained. I had a question that said, why are any of these questions important? And I laughed, but I thought I'd put it in there because each question relates to one of three things. Either 1, the timeline, 2, the opportunity, or 3, the evidence. And we are called exhuming the truth, you guys. So we're kind of trying to establish when Gus was last seen, who had access to him, and what physical evidence supports or contradicts a particular theory, which kind of ultimately determines what happened. And after all these months, everyone's asking questions like, what the hell's going on? I just can't understand how a child can go missing at all, let alone a child on a remote property like this and not be found. Like, they did do an extensive search. It's absolutely absurd to me, and it's absurd to me that the parents haven't spoken. Again, you obviously can't, judge a person's actions and say, oh, like, I would do this, which I do say that all the time, like I would be, but that's because I know I would be that very forceful. You would see me everywhere. I would literally run across the country 20 times to look for my children. You would know my name. You'd be sick of me if my child was missing. So I just find that so completely bizarre. And it gives me William Tyrrell vibes, and that is also a bizarre case. And I always think with cases like this where they don't give a lot, I think there's a lot known. And sometimes it's a matter of them waiting patiently for something to come up or something to happen that they're anticipating, and I mean investigators, to be able to like, not pounce, but kind of pounce, you know. They did charge, I believe it was Josie, with these firearm-related offences. Could this be because they were trying to hold Josie so that they could question her more, or you know what I mean? So they obviously do have something. There were so many questions that I really want to answer. I'll read a few of them just to get your minds ticking. I did have to turn the comments off to the previous post because there was like over 500 comments and people were going a bit bananas about Josie and the way that Josie presents herself. I honestly have no interest. I mean, I understand people asking about, you know, the mental health of this person, but you don't know the mental health of anybody, to be honest. So I think that's a question that you should be asking for everyone involved, not just Josie because she is transgender, and I think that's just like disrespectful and irrelevant, and we need to not talk about that. We need to be looking at facts. So I'm just pulling up the comments here. And literally the first top comment is people are too focused on the grandmother's transition instead of focusing on Gus. And I couldn't agree more. So we also have, until you have lived in a remote part of Australia, you have no idea of what can and can't happen. And I think the grandmother was right when she said that with all the movement of vehicles on the property in the first few days, a lot of the evidence would have been missed or removed, like tracks for the tracker to pick up on. Now, I agree with this partially because when Josie said, you know, police kind of came in full force, which they did, which is great, but the evidence that you would expect to see if a third party had entered the property and tried to or did abduct Gus, you'd be looking at tyre track evidence, and obviously that's gone if several police cars have driven over it. So I completely understand her point of view there. And how frustrating that would be. But at the same time, they did need to get in there and look for Gus. So it's just one of those things. I think trackers are quite good, and I think they would have been able to pick up, you know, I don't think Gus necessarily would have only walked in the spots where the police tyres would have gone, if that makes sense. Have the mother or father had anything to say? Nope. Were the parents separated? I have no idea. I also have no idea where the other sibling was. My guess is as good as yours. I'm sure or hope that the police have investigated any phone connections to the nearest tower at the time. Yeah, so they would have done this, but again, phone pings and, you know, to towers is very complex. It's not as simple as it seems, but yes, obviously they will have done their digital data collection, which is very useful. But this person also said that station kids are taught to walk on the tracks to avoid snakes and to be visible, which is very true. I was also born and raised on 2,000 acres, so this is true. I do agree with that. Another lady said that I have a missing sister and I don't know, but there is nothing in that interview which made me think that paternal grandparent was involved. Let my brain stop malfunctioning and try and work out what paternal grandparent, because wouldn't that be? Oh yeah, it is Josie. So sorry, that just makes me so confused, adding an extra layer of confusion for me. Look, I'm a very empathetic person by nature, but I'm also a scientist who likes solid evidence to make my decisions, and I don't like to base my decisions on emotion only, because we don't know these people. Let's be for real. We don't know them and the way that they react and respond emotionally. And for the people, I did not love how people were like, oh, Josie was talking about Gus in past tense. Well, yeah, no shit though, because she hasn't seen the kids since September, so it is past tense to her. And also, if you are like constantly having mainstream media and journalists and people rocking up at your property, how frustrating and disrespectful when you're missing a grandchild, assuming that Josie, you know, hasn't done anything. Could you imagine that? Like how uncomfortable that would be to then feel like you need to sit down and speak and and you're talking, like, you obviously have to talk in past tense because all of these things happened in the past and you haven't seen Gus since September, you know. So we have to be really careful when we're scrutinizing things like that, in my personal opinion. And another person said that I find it interesting that a grandparent gets the criticism and suspicion. Where was the mother during the search? And why was a small boy allowed to roam unattended in a hostile environment? So, I mean, him, you know, roaming unattended that's a parental thing, I guess, a supervision thing. It's also a lifestyle thing. But as far as, you know, the grandparent getting the criticism, I suppose it's because the grandparent was the last person allegedly to be with Gus. However, if we're referring to that, then Shannon should be the one on spotlight. Makes no sense to me. Yeah, people just keep saying that, you know, it's odd that the grandparents are kind of in the spotlight, but people saying I notice body language, words and behavior, and I find it defensive and not focused on finding him. And I agree with that, but also I kind of can relate. Like, I kind of can see that. Like, I would be defensive too. I felt like Josie was doing that because she felt like she had to, or someone had to speak. You know, I could obviously be very wrong, and I'm more than happy to have that chat, but that's just how I felt. And, you know, I'm irritated, and this isn't even my family. So I think I would be a lot more irritated than what Josie was talking on there, or even dealing with the media. Oh, bloody hell, like, I'm already frustrated dealing with media and I'm just nobody. So I think there was a bit of hostility there, and I you know, it could be for that reason, and it could be a defensive reason. Who knows? You know, people saying that he might have been kidnapped. There is a lady who said it'd be handy to see a picture of him without his curly hair, to see his eyes more clearly. I can try and generate that for everyone. I don't know if that's something that people want. I don't know. I might do it. This isn't like a great question. I'm going to read it because this is what people think, okay? And I'm not going to ignore it. I've just got no interest in people's sexual orientation anyway. I honestly don't care, unless it's like directly relating to a case. But this is what people are thinking. So I'm going to read it. It says, is grandma of sound mind, or is she having dementia because of sex change? Now, as far as I'm concerned, you don't just get dementia when you have a sex change. But again, I'm not a medical professional. And then they said, if this is the case, she may not recall what or where the child was left, or if something actually did happen, or if she killed the child and buried it somewhere. My bet is you would probably remember if you killed somebody and buried it somewhere, or, you know, you would definitely have some kind of guilt. But I have no knowledge. The reason I am not kind of directly responding to that is because I'm just not equipped to. I don't know. I don't have the medical knowledge to know if, you know, people are on certain medications or something. I don't know. That's something that you would probably have to ask somebody with an actual relevant opinion, because in that context, I'm just another person who has no experience with that. But I will say anybody could be on any type of medication that could alter their mental state. So that's something to be really careful of. A lot of people are on a lot of different medications, and this obviously is something that's very physical that we can see, so we can therefore make an assumption or a judgment. But a lot of people don't have something that is physical that you're able to see, and, you know, making a judgment on anybody's mental state is not, you know, it's not my wheelhouse unless there's more information. And in this case, there's not a whole lot to go off. And the common theme is, where are the parents? Why aren't they talking? I'd like to know why. Also, I feel very strongly about missing children, and I just don't think it's good enough, to be honest, that they're not saying anything. The parents should, you know, it doesn't matter if, you know, they don't know anything or whatever. They're the parents, you know, so they should be speaking and they should be appealing for help. So I'm going to end it there. I've waffled a little bit. I hope that you've learned something and you've kind of challenged your thoughts today, and that you continue to, when having discussions, you can have your opinion, but don't be closed off to taking in new information, and something that might alter your original opinion or perspective on something, because this is how we get answers professionally, and it's a really good thing to learn how to do, and it will strengthen your opinion at the end of the day after absorbing as much information as possible. So we'll continue to talk about this case as we know things, but it's not an easy one to discuss because there's not a lot that they're making publicly available. I don't know if there are any searches happening, but my best piece of information in regards to this case for you is to follow the Sleepers podcast, follow Brian Littley on Facebook. He is all over this case. He lives in South Australia. He's got lots of information. He's a very intelligent man. And I think any new information will probably come from him first, I would say. He's got quite a close connection to this case and to South Australia Police. So I do encourage you to jump over there also. But please don't leave me. Please also stay and contribute here. But yeah, that's just an idea. Also, again, thank you so much to everybody who's contributed to our crowdfunding and sharing and participating in chats like this. It's really great to see everybody interacting, and I appreciate you all. But as always, please stay safe, look after yourselves, and we'll chat again on Thursday. My name is Asha Carmody. This is Exhuming the Truth. Have a great evening.